Welcome to Empire Reimagined, Power and Politics in the 21st Century, a podcast where we dissect how imperialism has shapeshifted rather than disappeared in our supposedly post-colonial world. I'm your host, Kaede, and my background in international relations has given me a front-row seat to what I call imperialism in disguise, where nations dominate others not through direct rule, but through financial strangleholds, cultural bulldozing, and the occasional well-timed military exercise. Over the next 6 episodes, we'll explore how traditional empires have given way to something arguably more insidious. Systems where the chains are invisible, but the control remains painfully real. What makes our current moment particularly fascinating is how imperial ambitions now hide behind boardroom decisions rather than battlefield conquests. The colonial administrator in a pith helmet has been replaced by the IMF consultant with a spreadsheet. But the fundamental dynamic, the powerful extracting wealth from the less powerful, remains stubbornly intact. Today's episode focuses on defining what modern imperialism actually looks like, exploring how financial leverage has become the primary tool for dominating other nations, and examining the stark difference between historical empires that planted flags and contemporary powers that plant debt traps. Throughout this series, we'll examine specific case studies of modern imperial projects, from America's strategic partnerships that somehow always benefit American corporations, to Russia's nostalgic land grabs justified by historical revisionism, to China's infrastructure diplomacy that has an uncanny way of turning into asset seizures when loan payments inevitably fall behind. We'll also explore the ideological underpinnings of these projects, particularly how conservative nationalism provides the intellectual framework for justifying dominance. But first, let's establish what exactly we mean when we talk about imperialism in the 21st century. Because if you can't recognize the empire, you'll never see how it shapes your daily life, right down to the price of your morning coffee. The contrast between colonial and modern imperialism couldn't be starker, at least in appearance. When Britain ruled India, the mechanism was brutally straightforward: soldiers, administrators, and a flag. Resources flowed directly from colony to metropole, with barely any pretense about the arrangement. Today's version operates with considerably more subtlety. Take the United States, which would never dream of calling itself an empire despite having over 750 military bases in 80 countries and dictating economic policies to nations unfortunate enough to need IMF loans. The modern imperial playbook relies on financial dominance through debt and trade rather than direct territorial control, allowing powerful nations to extract wealth without the messy business of actually governing foreign populations. This transition was brilliantly outlined by economist Prabhat Patnaik, who described how empires now extract wealth primarily through financial mechanisms rather than territorial occupation. When a country accepts IMF assistance, it typically comes with structural adjustment requirements. Privatize your utilities, reduce social spending, open markets to foreign investors that effectively transfer economic sovereignty to external powers. The colonial governor has been replaced by the credit rating agency, which can cripple a nation's economy with a single downgrade. It's rather like replacing the mugger who demands your wallet at gunpoint with a banker who politely asks you to sign loan documents with terms that will eventually cost you your house. The outcome is the same, only the manners have improved. This evolution didn't happen overnight or by accident. As direct colonial rule became politically untenable in the post-World War II era, imperial powers evolved. They discovered that controlling a country's economic policy through debt leverage provided most of the benefits of colonialism without the administrative headaches or international condemnation. Why occupy a country when you can own its debt? Why install a governor when you can impose austerity measures? Why risk soldiers' lives when you can simply restrict market access? The genius of modern imperialism lies in its plausible deniability. Nations can dominate others while simultaneously claiming to champion freedom, democracy, and self-determination. It's gaslighting on a geopolitical scale. Modern imperialism manifests through 5 distinct but interconnected traits that collectively form a system of domination without direct rule. First, economic dominance. Powerful nations leverage international financial institutions like the IMF and World Bank to impose policies that benefit external interests rather than local populations. When Argentina faced economic crisis in 2018, IMF assistance came with 56 specific policy demands, including cutting social programs that protected the country's most vulnerable citizens. This isn't assistance, it's economic colonization hidden behind technical jargon and financial expertise. The numbers tell the story. Countries under IMF programs experience average public spending reductions of 26%, while multinational corporate profits in those same countries increase by 34%. The second trait, cultural influence, operates more subtly but no less effectively. Hollywood films, American music, and Western media dominate global cultural spaces, shaping values, aspirations, and consumer preferences worldwide. This isn't merely entertainment, it's a powerful vehicle for promoting particular worldviews and creating markets for Western products. When 73% of globally distributed films come from Hollywood, it's not just entertainment distribution, it's cultural programming that privileges certain perspectives while marginalizing others. The third trait, strategic alliances, transforms supposedly equal partnerships into mechanisms for extending imperial influence. NATO's eastward expansion, adding 14 former Warsaw Pact countries since 1999, exemplifies how military alliances can function as tools for power projection rather than mutual defense. The fourth trait, proxy warfare, allows imperial powers to pursue geopolitical objectives without direct military engagement. Iran's support for militias across the Middle East, Russia's backing of separatists in Ukraine, and America's funding of various armed groups all represent modern imperial strategies for projecting power while maintaining plausible deniability. Finally, technological control, the newest frontier of imperialism, manifests through dominance of internet infrastructure, surveillance capabilities, and digital platforms. When 92% of global internet traffic passes through American-owned infrastructure, and Chinese surveillance technology is exported to 63 countries, we're witnessing imperial control of the digital commons. These 5 traits combine to form a system where domination is exercised not through colonial administrators, but through bankers, algorithms, proxy fighters, and cultural products. Less visible than traditional empires, but arguably more pervasive. China's Belt and Road Initiative (BRI) offers a perfect case study of modern imperialism in action, an ambitious program that has entangled 149 countries in a web of infrastructure development, financial dependency, and strategic leverage. Launched in 2013 as the New Silk Road, the BRI presents itself as a benevolent development program connecting Asia with Africa and Europe. However, beneath this narrative of mutual benefit lies a carefully constructed system of debt-trap diplomacy. By 2025, BRI projects will have accumulated over $8.6 trillion in total investment commitments, with recipient countries often unable to generate sufficient revenue to repay Chinese loans. The pattern is distressingly consistent. China finances infrastructure projects using loans that recipient countries can't afford, leading to either asset seizures or political concessions when debt payments inevitably falter. Consider Panama's predicament. By 2025, the country faces crushing repayment pressures on $2.8 billion in Chinese loans for port facilities and canal expansion projects. The loans' terms were initially attractive, with grace periods and seemingly reasonable interest rates, but the fine print included sovereignty-compromising clauses allowing China to take control of assets in case of default. This isn't development assistance. It's calculated economic encirclement designed to secure strategic assets, natural resources, and political influence. What makes China's approach particularly effective is how it exploits legitimate development needs in recipient countries, offering financing when Western institutions won't, but with hidden costs that become apparent only after the contracts are signed and construction has begun. The BRI represents financial imperialism at its most sophisticated, using debt rather than direct control to achieve strategic objectives. When Sri Lanka couldn't service Chinese loans for Hambantota port, the country was forced to lease the facility to China for 99 years, effectively surrendering sovereign territory through financial rather than military means. By 2025, similar scenarios are unfolding across Africa, Central Asia, and Latin America as payment deadlines approach and economic realities collide with political ambitions. China has essentially reinvented colonial-era concessions without the gunboats, creating a network of dependent states bound not by formal colonial relationships, but by crushing debt obligations. It's imperialism with spreadsheets rather than soldiers, but the power dynamics remain fundamentally the same. The financial machinery of modern imperialism operates through sophisticated mechanisms that create dependency while maintaining the appearance of voluntary transactions. Sovereign debt has become a primary tool for controlling other nations' policies. A country desperately needing funds faces a Faustian bargain: accept external policy dictates or face economic collapse. When Argentina signed its 2018 IMF agreement, the country surrendered control over its central bank, taxation policies, and social spending programs in exchange for $50 billion that largely went to servicing existing debts, rather than developing the national economy. This isn't lending. It's financial subjugation disguised as assistance, creating a cycle where indebted nations work primarily to satisfy external creditors rather than meet citizens' needs. Trade agreements represent another powerful instrument of economic control, particularly through unequal enforcement mechanisms. When CAFTA-DR was implemented in 2006, the free trade agreement between the U.S., Central American nations, and the Dominican Republic, it included investor-state dispute settlement provisions allowing corporations to sue governments for policy changes affecting profits. The result: by 2025, multinational corporations had filed 47 cases against CAFTA-DR countries, winning $2.7 billion in settlements while effectively constraining these nations' regulatory authority. Meanwhile, labor and environmental provisions theoretically protecting weaker parties remained largely unenforced. The asymmetry is striking powerful countries, and their corporations gain enforceable rights while developing nations receive paper promises. Currency manipulation completes this trinity of financial control mechanisms. When the U.S. dollar functions as the world's reserve currency, American monetary policy becomes a tool of global economic dominance. The Federal Reserve's 2022-2023 interest rate hikes ostensibly targeted domestic inflation, but simultaneously triggered capital flight from developing economies, currency depreciation, and debt crises across the global South. As one Ghanaian finance minister bitterly observed, "We never voted for the Federal Reserve chairman, yet his decisions determine whether our children eat." By 2025, 78% of global trade is still conducted in dollars despite the U.S. representing only 24% of global GDP, ensuring that American economic priorities cascade through the international system regardless of their impact on other nations. This isn't economic leadership, it's monetary imperialism. Economist Prabhat Patnaik's groundbreaking analysis in The Changing Face of Imperialism, 2021, provides crucial theoretical framing for understanding our current reality. Patnaik traces imperialism's evolution from territorial control to financial hegemony, identifying the 1970s debt crises as the pivotal moment when imperial powers discovered that financial instruments could achieve colonial objectives without colonial administration. According to Patnaik, modern imperialism no longer needs direct rule. It has perfected the art of resource extraction through market mechanisms. This shift wasn't accidental, but calculated, a response to decolonization movements that made traditional empire politically unsustainable while preserving the economic benefits through financial instruments. Patnaik identifies three crucial mechanisms that maintain this system. Capital mobility, allowing instantaneous punishment of non-compliant governments. International institutions enforcing rules-based systems that systematically favor wealthy nations. And military intervention, reserved for those who challenge the financial order too directly. The brilliance of this system lies in its apparent neutrality. Market forces and technical requirements replace explicit imperial demands, allowing domination to occur through seemingly objective economic mechanisms. When Ecuador attempted to audit its national debt in 2007, finding 70% potentially illegitimate, international financial markets immediately restricted access to capital, while credit rating agencies downgraded the country's debt, demonstrating how quickly the system punishes challenges to its fundamental arrangements. Perhaps most importantly, Patnaik demonstrates how financial imperialism creates the illusion of sovereignty while effectively constraining policy choices. Nations appear independent, but face severe consequences for deviating from approved economic orthodoxy. When Greece elected an anti-austerity government in 2015, European financial institutions didn't need to send troops or appoint governors. They simply restricted liquidity to the banking system, forcing capitulation within weeks. By 2025, this dynamic has only intensified, with financial markets responding to policy deviations within minutes rather than days. Patnaik's central insight remains devastatingly relevant. Modern imperialism has evolved beyond territorial control, but preserved its essential function, extracting wealth from the periphery to benefit the center, now using financial instruments rather than colonial administrators. Modern imperialism extends beyond finance into cultural and technological domains, creating comprehensive systems of influence and control. Cultural imperialism manifests through the global dominance of Western, particularly American, media, entertainment, and consumer products, which shape values, preferences, and aspirations worldwide. When Hollywood films account for 73% of global box office revenue despite representing just 6% of films produced, we're witnessing not just entertainment distribution, but cultural programming on an industrial scale. The homogenization of global culture serves imperial interests by creating both markets for Western products and populations receptive to Western political perspectives. A dynamic media scholar, Herbert Schiller, described as creating consumers with standardized tastes who respond predictably to market stimuli. Technological imperialism represents the newest frontier of domination, operating through control of digital infrastructure, platforms, and standards. When 5 American tech companies, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, have combined market capitalization exceeding the GDP of 96% of nations, we're observing economic concentration with profound imperial implications. These entities don't just dominate markets, they establish the rules governing digital life globally, with policy decisions made in Silicon Valley boardrooms affecting billions worldwide. China's alternative technological sphere, centered around companies like Alibaba, Tencent, and Huawei, doesn't challenge this imperial dynamic, but merely establishes a competing imperial system, with digital surveillance and control as central features of both American and Chinese models. The fusion of technological and cultural imperialism creates particularly powerful control mechanisms. When TikTok's algorithm determines what content 1.2 billion users worldwide see, we're witnessing an unprecedented capacity to shape global consciousness without traditional forms of censorship. Similarly, when Netflix decides which stories from which cultures receive global distribution, it exercises cultural gatekeeping with imperial implications. By 2025, AI systems trained primarily on Western data and values have become global arbiters of relevant information, appropriate expression, and normal behavior extending Western cultural hegemony into algorithmic space. These systems don't require colonial administrators or even human intervention. They automatically propagate specific cultural perspectives while marginalizing others, creating what media theorist Safia Noble calls technological redlining that systematically disadvantages non-Western perspectives. Conservative nationalism provides the ideological backbone for modern imperial projects across dramatically different political systems. In Russia, Putin justifies territorial aggression through appeals to historical Russian greatness and traditional values supposedly threatened by Western liberalism. In China, Xi Jinping's Chinese dream combines nationalist rhetoric about restoring China's rightful place in the world with conservative emphasis on hierarchy, authority, and proper social order. Even in democratic America, conservative nationalism manifests through America First policies that prioritize national interests while disregarding impacts on others. The exact ideological framework that has historically justified imperial ambitions through exceptionalist rhetoric. Conservative political theorist Corey Robin identifies the crucial connection between conservative ideology and imperial projects in his landmark work, The Reactionary Mind. 2017. Robin argues that conservatism fundamentally defends power hierarchies, whether domestic or international, and naturally justifies imperial dominance through appeals to tradition, order, and civilization. From Edmund Burke's defense of British imperialism in India to contemporary arguments for American leadership, conservative thought consistently provides intellectual frameworks that justify domination of the weak by the strong, whether within nations or between them. This ideological foundation explains why imperial projects consistently emerge from conservative nationalist movements that emphasize traditional hierarchies, civilizational superiority, and the natural right of the powerful to lead the weak. This connection becomes particularly evident in how modern imperial powers justify their actions, never as domination, but always as protection, leadership, or assistance. Russia doesn't invade Ukraine, but protects Russian speakers. China doesn't debt-trap nations, but offers development assistance. America doesn't impose economic policies, but provides technical guidance. This rhetorical sleight of hand, perfected by colonial powers claiming to civilize subject populations, remains remarkably consistent across centuries and political systems. By 2025, this conservative nationalist justification for imperial projects has only intensified, with rising powers like India similarly deploying narratives of civilizational greatness and traditional values to justify regional dominance. The empire changes, but the conservative nationalist justification remains stubbornly consistent. Modern imperialism might seem abstract, but its impacts manifest in everyday economic realities that affect billions worldwide. Consider your morning coffee. The price you pay reflects not just supply and demand, but power asymmetries embedded in global commodity markets. Coffee-producing nations in the global south receive approximately 7 to 10% of the final retail price, while financial intermediaries, processors, and retailers in imperial centers capture the remaining 90 to 93%. This value extraction occurs through market mechanisms rather than colonial appropriation. But the outcome remains strikingly similar. Wealth flows from producers to imperial centers through seemingly neutral economic arrangements that mask underlying power dynamics. Resource extraction provides another clear example of modern imperialism's everyday impact. When multinational mining corporations operate in the Democratic Republic of Congo, extracting cobalt essential for smartphone batteries, they typically repatriate 97% of profits to shareholders in imperial centers, while leaving environmental damages, health impacts, and minimal tax revenue in the host country. The extraction occurs through legal contracts rather than colonial appropriation, but the fundamental dynamic, resources flowing from periphery to center with minimal local benefit, mirrors colonial patterns with uncanny precision. By 2025, despite growing rhetoric about ethical sourcing and sustainable development, the basic structure remains intact. Resources flow out, profits flow to imperial centers, and externalities stay local. Perhaps most significantly, modern imperialism shapes economic development possibilities for billions worldwide. When the IMF pressures developing nations to prioritize debt service over public investment, it constrains development pathways in ways that perpetuate dependency. Ethiopia's 2025 IMF program requires the country to allocate 34% of government revenue to debt service, while limiting education spending to 9%, effectively prioritizing creditor interests over human development. Similar constraints affect everything from healthcare access to infrastructure development across the global south, creating systematic disadvantages that maintain imperial hierarchies without requiring formal colonial structures. These aren't abstract geopolitical issues, but concrete realities determining whether children attend school, whether communities have health care, and whether nations can build the infrastructure necessary for genuine development. As we conclude our exploration of modern imperialism, several key insights emerge that help us understand our current global reality. First, modern imperialism operates primarily through financial mechanisms rather than territorial control, transforming the methods of domination while preserving the fundamental power dynamics that define imperial relationships. The colonial administrator has been replaced by the credit rating agency, the military occupation by the structural adjustment program, and the gunboat by the capital flight threat. But the extractive relationship between center and periphery remains fundamentally intact. By recognizing these mechanisms, we can begin to see through the rhetorical disguises that hide contemporary imperial projects behind technical language and market rationality. Second, technological and cultural dimensions have become increasingly central to imperial projects, creating systems of influence and control that extend far beyond traditional economic relationships. When algorithms determine what information billions of people see, when streaming platforms decide which cultural products receive global distribution, and when technical standards establish the rules governing digital life, we're witnessing imperial power operating through new channels with unprecedented reach and subtlety. The most effective form of control isn't forcing people to do what they don't want. It's shaping their desires so they voluntarily participate in systems that disadvantage them while benefiting imperial centers. Finally, resistance to modern imperialism requires recognizing these systems for what they are despite their intentionally obscured nature. When debt becomes the primary mechanism of control, debt cancellation becomes an anti-imperial act. When financial markets punish policy independence, capital controls become tools of sovereignty. When technology platforms impose imperial standards, digital autonomy becomes revolutionary. By 2025, we're seeing emerging resistance across multiple domains, from Kenya's debt strike coalition demanding renegotiation of predatory Chinese loans, to Bolivia's lithium nationalization, preserving resource benefits for citizens rather than multinational corporations. The first step in challenging modern imperialism is seeing through its disguises, recognizing the imperial project behind the neutral language of markets, development, and technical necessity. In our next episode, America First Imperialism, Trump's hypothetical second term, we'll examine how conservative nationalism shapes imperial policy through a specific case study. We'll analyze how a hypothetical Trump presidency from 2021 to 2025 might serve as a textbook example of American imperial projection rooted in explicitly conservative ideological frameworks. From Edmund Burke's defense of British Empire to contemporary nationalist rhetoric justifying American dominance, we'll trace the conservative intellectual tradition that consistently provides justification for imperial projects, while claiming to defend tradition and security. We'll explore specific case studies illustrating this dynamic, including a hypothetical March 2025 Ukraine ceasefire brokered by the US, but effectively favoring Russian territorial gains. A February 2025 Gaza plan establishing American dominance in the region under the guise of peacekeeping, and economic strong-arming using tariff threats to extract concessions from trading partners. These scenarios illustrate the consistent pattern of conservative nationalist rhetoric justifying imperial actions through appeals to tradition, security, and American exceptionalism, demonstrating how easily America first transforms into America overall. Before we conclude today's episode, I want to thank you for joining me on this exploration of modern imperialism's evolving forms. Understanding these dynamics isn't merely an academic exercise. It's essential for recognizing how global power shapes our daily economic realities and for identifying potential points of resistance. If you found this analysis valuable, please share it with others who might benefit from seeing beneath the surface of our supposedly post-imperial world. Next week, we'll continue our journey through empire's continuing evolution with a focus on how conservative nationalism provides the ideological foundation for imperial projects across dramatically different political systems. I'm Kaede, reminding you that empires haven't disappeared. They've just updated their methods while hoping we won't notice the familiar patterns behind the new disguises.